So thanks everybody for finding the time to be here today. This is our official third Landscape of Practice meeting. And we are very excited to introduce our guest for today. But just before we get started, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge that where I am currently located, which is Carleton University. It operates and is located on the unceded, unsurrendered traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the lands in which you currently reside. I also want to acknowledge that it is International Women's Day. And I think that most people that are attending here today work for women's rights daily, but I just wanted to again highlight the focus for this year's International Women's Day is to embrace equity. And there is acknowledgement that equity is nice to have. It's not just nice to have, it's a must-have. A focus on gender equity needs to be part of every society's DNA. And I think equity is really at the crux of the work that we are all hoping to do through this. So just so everybody has an idea of what's happening today, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the broader project. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to Nicole from Yoga Outreach. Then we'll have sort of a general Q&A period for Nicole. And then we will, as part of our Landscape of Practice, we will break out into our discussion rooms and we'll provide a little more detail later. So we are very grateful to the Public Health Agency of Canada and the call Preventing and Addressing Family Violence, the Health Perspective, for funding this research that we are doing. And this Landscape of Practice is one small piece of this larger project where we're really hoping to leverage trauma and violence informed physical activity to support individuals who have experienced family violence. And now I would like to introduce Nicole Marcia. So Nicole is joining us today from Vancouver, BC, where she's the Director of Training and Mentorship at Yoga Outreach, and where she also runs a private practice providing client-centered counseling and yoga therapy. Nicole has worked with folks with histories of trauma since 2004 and has a master's degree with a specialization in yoga therapy. While Nicole is better suited to talk about the role of Yoga Outreach, I'll briefly mention that they're an organization doing fabulous work in Vancouver and beyond, and they're working to expand access to trauma-informed movement for folks facing challenges with mental health issues, substance use, poverty, violence, trauma, and imprisonment. So we've been really fortunate to partner with Yoga Outreach over the past number of years in the work that we're doing. And we're really grateful for their partnership in this project. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to have Nicole take over. So Nicole, thanks so much for being here. And I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm really honored to be here. I also feel a little bit nervous. So that's out there too. I very much appreciate the introduction, telling you a little bit about who I am and the work that I do. And I also, want to be really clear about who I'm not. I'm not an expert in yoga. I'm not an expert in much of anything, which might not instill a lot of confidence, but that would be the truth of the matter. I didn't create anything that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Really, it's all rooted in the good work of other folks, past and present. And I'm also not somebody that has yoga woven into my ancestry in any way. I am a Sicilian Jew. And my ancestors came here right around the time of World War I as political and economic refugees. So I am about as far off of having yoga woven into one's ancestry as you can probably get. Um, so I'm here primarily to talk to you, about the good work that Yoga Outreach does, and appreciate the initial sort of backdrop of the work that we do. And I can tell you a little bit more. So we were founded in 1996 by a yoga teacher named Sandra Sammartino, who was approached by a correctional facility and asked to start bringing yoga classes into that facility. And that's pretty much how Yoga Outreach was born. I joined Yoga Outreach in 2007 as a volunteer. I was working or volunteering with folks with diagnosis of HIV over at Friends for Life. That was my very first placement. At that time, in order to volunteer for Yoga Outreach, you just needed to show up at a potluck at the executive director's place. And if they liked you, they'd hand you a manual and place you. These days, the work that we do is a little bit different than that. So one of the big pieces of the work that we do is we train and place yoga teachers as volunteers into organizations that serve folks that might not otherwise get access to yoga programming. The training that we provide is in trauma and violence informed approaches to yoga. We also partner with various organizations such as correctional facilities, transition houses, mental health facilities. We've also been invited into Indigenous communities in order to provide yoga programming. Sometimes in the case of Indigenous communities, we've partnered in order to expand capacity within those communities for the delivery of trauma and violence informed yoga. We exist virtually, like a lot of organizations. And right now, in terms of staff, we have an executive director and we have myself. So we're a little bit small right now. We definitely survived the pandemic. But coming out of it has been a little bit of a bumpy road, as it has been, I think, for a lot of nonprofits. So we're here and we continue to do what I think is some pretty good work. So I wanted to share a little bit about that work and kind of our approach to that work. And so I'm just going to bring up a slide here. So as you can probably imagine, given the brief introduction that I've given you to the work of Yoga Outreach, we support folks with a lot of different sort of intersecting experiences of trauma. Sometimes, we're working with people who have experienced a singular traumatic event that isn't interpersonal in nature. For the most part, though, we are supporting folks who have experienced interpersonal trauma. That can include things like childhood trauma, complex trauma, trauma that's historical, that's intergenerational, vicarious trauma. So we also do work with staff at some of the organizations that we provide programming at. So often we're going to see experiences of vicarious trauma with the staff there. And then of course, everybody that we work with, including ourselves, we're all impacted by interlocking systems of oppression. And, at least from the perspective of Yoga Outreach, we would say that oppression is traumatic. So we understand that our students, the people that access our programs, experience both, kind of situational, non-interpersonal traumas and interpersonal traumas. So what we'll see sometimes in yoga outreach classes are folks who are living with chronic pain, who have trouble sleeping, folks who are experiencing various sort of states of hyper or hypoarousal, We might be working with people who experience a lot of isolation for various reasons. Again, that can be related to um, oppression. It can also be related to experiences of, avoidance, trying to avoid reminders of traumatic events. Often we're working with folks who don't feel particularly safe in their bodies or safe in the world. So hypervigilance, um, a low threshold startle response, along with experiences of hyperarousal for sure. Our students are often experiencing dissociation, flashbacks, or reliving of traumatic experiences. We see high rates of anxiety and depression, and we also work with folks who experience a lot of challenges in relationships. So given the complex intersection of needs that we see in yoga outreach clients, we're really clear that we can't just lean on the tools and techniques of yoga. What is equally, if not more important in the work of yoga outreach is the work of relationships. We understand that healing from relational trauma or interpersonal trauma can only happen in the context of a safer, sort of more courageous kind of relationship. And so, again, while we utilize the tools and techniques of yoga, we understand that, the relationship between the teacher and the student could be a site of healing from trauma, that our students' relationships with one another also has that kind of healing potential, and that our students' relationships with the people outside of the class, that could be their family, their community, their partners, that those are also sites of healing from trauma. So our work is really at its heart relational. So the physical practice of yoga can be helpful for folks in some of the following ways. We know that because yoga can increase activity in the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and at other times increase activity in this parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, that switching back and forth can ultimately create a heartier stress response. Our trauma and violence informed practices have a real emphasis on accessibility. And I'm actually going to be inviting you to join me in a brief chair practice in a moment. So you'll have a sense of how, hopefully accessible our practices can be. Yoga outreach practices really emphasize interoceptive awareness, or feeling what one feels in one's body. We know that interoceptive awareness is something that can be impacted if our bodies don't feel like safe places to be and we've had to abdicate from them. So very adaptive, right? If feeling what you feel in your body doesn't feel safe, it makes sense to abdicate from your body in some way in order to survive. Now, what we know about this, despite it being adaptive, is that it can actually impact our ability to care for our bodies. So, if you can't safely feel what's happening in your body, it's hard to take care of it. We also know that interoceptive awareness, or feeling relatively safe in one's body, is really connected to feeling safe in the world and safe in the relationships where healing from trauma can occur. One of the pieces that I really like about the way that we teach yoga is that it's an opportunity to practice mindfulness, or paying attention to what's happening in the present moment, without having to sit still with your eyes closed in a room full of strangers. Okay, and again, you'll have a little bit of a sample of what that might look like. We know that mindfulness can be helpful for addressing some of the symptoms associated with depression and anxiety. Our classes are an opportunity to break isolation, some of the isolation that can be associated with the aftermath of traumatic experiences and certain experiences of oppression. One of the other cool things about yoga outreach is that actually we go into the facilities where folks are already accessing yoga programs. So they don't have to deal with all of the sort of barriers that they might have to deal with going into a yoga studio. Our classes are an opportunity for our students to practice self-awareness and self-regulation, always with the intention of feeling safer and more connected in experiences of co-regulation. So we're really interested in how the practice impacts our students' relationships. These practices can be helpful for supporting folks in having a really self-directed experience of self-care. They're an opportunity to connect and to co-regulate with other folks. The practice can support people in becoming stronger and more flexible, both physically and emotionally, psychologically. Um, the practices are also designed to support folks' digestion as well as their sleep, which we know both of those pieces can be really impacted by traumatic experience, and also to impact people's energy levels. So we're always trying to tie this practice in a really practical way to what matters to our students. All of our classes are built upon a framework that was developed initially at the Trauma Center at the Justice Resource Institute in Brookline, Massachusetts, by a yoga teacher and his colleagues named Dave Emerson. And they're now they've now formed their own organization called the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. The framework that our classes are built upon is referred to as reclaiming the body. Reclaiming the body. And it has three aspects to it. So the first is having a body. In having a body, the yogic tools associated with this phase are asana and grounding. And asana is a Sanskrit word. Sanskrit is an ancient language. It's the language that yoga practices and philosophies were written down in, and it actually refers to the physical forms of the practice. So in having a body, we utilize the physical forms of the practice and grounding to support folks in practicing interoceptive awareness with the intention of supporting them in having safer bodily experiences. The next phase of reclaiming the body is referred to as befriending the body. And there's a yogic precept associated with this phase, and that precept is ahimsa. And ahimsa means non-harming in Sanskrit. We express non-harming in yoga outreach classes in a lot of ways, but in this particular aspect through language, the language of invitation and the language of inquiry. The language of invitation is an opportunity for folks to practice making choices with their bodies. We understand that choice is something that gets taken away in the midst of traumatic experience. So the language of invitation is designed to support an embodied experience of choice and empowerment. And we believe that empowerment needs to be present in some way in order to support folks to heal from traumatic experience. And sometimes I think also needs, well, definitely needs to be in place in order to push back against systems of oppression. The other type of language that we use is the language of inquiry, which again promotes interoceptive awareness and is a practice of mindfulness. Finally, the third aspect is body as a resource. And the yogic tool associated with this phase is pranayama. So directly translated, pranayama refers like to the movement of life force or energy throughout one's body. And from a yogic perspective, prana or life force, what has our hearts beat, what has our lungs breathe, is actually the same life force that exists within everything else that's alive on the planet. So this is a very connective perspective. We're not separate from nature, right? We're connected to it. So in Body as a resource, we start to share with our clients and our students why we're doing what we're doing and how the breath and different physical forms might support them in caring for themselves and also engaging in community care. So it's extremely difficult for somebody who likes to talk as much as I do to fit all of that information into that period of time. But I think we have success. Yes? There's a recording. So if I'm speaking kind of fast, of course, you can always go back and watch that recording. I would like to invite you into a little bit of a practice here. And I just want to check in that, Maddie, it's okay to go till 10:30. Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, no problem. That's perfect.
Okay. So you got choices in this practice, right? If something I'm inviting you to do doesn't feel right for you, you don't have to do it. It's fine to rest if you feel called to rest or to explore a different practice or form or flow if that's what you feel called to. If you're curious about this practice, you could come to a comfortable seated place a little closer to the edge of your chair. That means you're going to have a little space behind you. And if you're a little shorter in the limb, as I am, it means it'll bring your feet a little closer to the floor. Okay. We'll be practicing for about 6 minutes. We'll move through breathing, through grounding, through some of the physical forms of the practice, and then we can come on into a stillness practice. So, feet in contact with the floor, maybe hips width apart, your choice. You can bring your palms to rest, facing down or facing up. And your eyes could be open or your eyes could be closed. In your own time, dropping down into some slow, full breaths. And this could look like slow, full breaths in and out through your nose or through your mouth. The invitation here is to allow your inhale to deepen and your exhale to lengthen. And keep in mind, this lengthening of the exhale may just be like a fraction of a second longer than the inhale, and that's fine. There's no need to force the breath in any way. This lengthening of the exhale is one way that you can use your breath to send a signal of safety to your nervous system in your brain. So, if you're ever feeling anxious, you might explore breathing in this way. If it feels like a good fit for you, a deepening of your inhale and a lengthening of your exhale if you choose. And as you continue to explore breath, we could start to transition towards grounding. Grounding is a technique that some folks find is helpful for transitions, like from work to home or home to work. One way to begin grounding is by dropping your awareness down and presencing yourself to where your feet make contact with the support of the floor as you breathe. For the second step in grounding, invitation to bring your awareness up. to the center of your body. Consider bringing one hand to rest on your belly and one hand to rest on your heart. And if resting hands on your front body doesn't suit you today, you could always let your hands hover, one over belly, one over heart. If you have chosen to rest your hands here, you might tune in to the weight and the warmth of your hands. You might notice the rise and fall of your hands on your inhale and your exhale. And resting hands in this way can support the release of oxytocin, which is something that can support us in feeling a bit calmer and connected in the context of relationships. Yeah, so if you're ever feeling a bit activated and you're looking for a way to regulate, co-regulate, you might explore a practice like this. For the last step in grounding, invitation to bring your awareness up to the crown of your head. You could even lengthen up a little through the crown of your head. And if you choose to explore that lengthening up movement, you may be aware of sensation, right? Like the sensation of muscles activating in order to support that upward movement. Deep inhales and long exhales. Yeah, and I'll invite you to join me now in a couple of forms. This first form is an invitation to link the movement of your body with your breath. You could start out by bringing your hands to rest on your knees. And then in your own time, on an exhale, rounding your spine, you could round your shoulders. You might release your chin towards your chest. If it feels right for your body on the inhale, you could lengthen your spine. You could draw your chest forward. You might even tilt your chin up and look up. That's the invitation for flow here. It's an exhale to round and an inhale to lengthen, to draw forward, to look up. And you can carry on here at your own pace. You might even find a place where you want to pause. Or again, you could flow from my count of 3. And I'm just marking time here, not necessarily the amount of, cycles that you should be going through. Just marking time. 2. You could presence yourself to sensation at each phase of this flow. Practicing noticing what's happening in your body. One more cycle here. So like an inhale, to lengthen, to draw forward, to look up. And then maybe an exhale to round your spine, to round your shoulders. You might release the weight of your head. If this form feels complete, we'll meet you back in a neutral seated form. We're going to start to wrap up. So you could take a deep inhale through your nose and a long exhale through your mouth. And this could mark the end of any kind of intentional breathing for the practice. So you could let your breath come naturally now. If your eyes are closed, you might open them and make yourself comfortable.